All right, so looking at the nerve supply to muscle. The nerve supply to muscle can vary depending on whether it's a gross motor movement or a fine motor movement. So, as the example I had used before, the eye might have a few or will have a few motor units or nerves connecting to the muscle fiber. So, just to throw some numbers out there, this may not be 100% accurate, but let's just say 5 to 7 would be the nerve supply to the eye to each muscle fiber. Whereas looking at something again with the gross motor movement, we're looking at the quadriceps. So with the quadriceps, we might be looking more at, let's say, for every nerve or motor unit would be supplying about 300 muscle fibers. So that's a bit of a difference of that ratio. So you'll see more of like maybe 1-to-1 ratio as opposed to like a 1-to-300 ratio for the gross motor movement. So the motor unit has a few parts to it that's very important to know. We have an anterior motor neuron, and then we have the actual muscle fibers it innervates. We also call this the functional unit of movement. And we look at the muscle itself. The muscle itself contains quite a few motor units. But again, it can have each of which can contain a single motor neuron and its muscle fibers, again, that it innervates. So just to show you a little more detail. So we have over here the soma, or the cell body. And this is where we get an electrochemical signal. So it's actually quite interesting. So it goes from being, so we have these dendrites, and we have the dendrites that pick up the electrical signal from other nerves or motor neurons. And it all goes to, as soon as enough of an impulse, we get enough excitation and impulse coming in from these dendrites and all these signals, it sends an impulse. And that impulse, you'll see, can branch out to these muscle fibers. And from here, we have the electrical. And then down here, we end up having a chemical reaction. That's why it's electrochemical. And this, you can see, is the entire motor unit that I've been referring to. So we have the neuron all the way down to the motor end plates here, the muscles. So that's the motor unit, neuron, and then the fibers it innervates. So we have also on here, you will see the axon, and then we have the axon hillock, and then the axon. And then you might notice these little sheaths here. Well, these little sheaths are known as the myelin sheath. And what it actually does is it speeds up this electrical impulse. You can see down here at this picture, it's actually speeds up the electrical impulse. And it actually causes a jump. You'll see that it's placed in between some openings here. Right? So it actually causes the impulse to go faster. And you might be thinking that there are some diseases that impact or cause problems here within this myelin sheath. And so the action potential, when this fires, again, when it receives enough of an impulse in the dendrites and fires, it creates that action potential, which travels down the axon hillock and all the way down until it hits the terminal branches here. Well, that can, again, happen fast because we have these myelin sheaths. It has some fat and proteins on here. Well, with autoimmune diseases such as multiple sclerosis or MS, these sheaths become worn away and damaged, and therefore that signal cannot go as fast because, again, these myelin sheaths speed up the action potential. So we have a higher transmission and velocity with that myelin sheath. All right, the nodes of Ranvier, it's a little gap in between there, and myelin allow the impulse to jump. Right, and this is actually known as a saltatory conduction, is what I was talking about. So just to reiterate what I was talking about before, so it allows the impulse to jump. All right, so the myelin sheath and the node of Ranvier. And so as soon as this action potential comes all the way down and then hits this motor end plate, which we'll look at more detail later on, that's where the nerve itself ends up communicating with the muscle fibers. So from motor unit, the motor unit itself is from the nerve all the way down to the muscle fiber. And here's some videos that I would recommend watching. I don't really go too much into action potentials and talk about the sodium-potassium gated channels. So that's something that should have gone over in anatomy and physiology. So looking at the neuromuscular junction, you'll see here that the neuromuscular junction, so we had this nerve here. So we see the upper part of the nerve. Well, now we're going to be looking at this motor end plate here and the neuromuscular junction, the junction between the motor end plate and the muscle fiber in which it innervates. Okay, so now we have this close-up here. Okay, so let's see what happens. So as we head down, all right, so the motor neuron itself gets the impulse. The soma or the cell body receives the impulse from the dendrites. We get enough of an impulse from the dendrites up top here. Right, and then we have that action potential nodes of Ranvier right here, and the myelin sheath. It's the electrical current jumps. And then we have over here the neuromuscular junction. All right, so that neuromuscular junction, again, is that end part here where we have the presynaptic membrane right here, the synaptic cleft, which is this area, and then the postsynaptic membrane right here. And you notice there's folds. Folds, against the natural thing that our body does, is really kind of cool, is increases the surface area. All right, so we get the impulse coming down. You kind of see the arrow there. And we have in these vesicles here, we have acetylcholine. That's where we get the chemical release. So electrochemical, electrical, and then here's chemical. And these vesicles will release acetylcholine from the presynaptic membrane through the neuromuscular junction and to the postsynaptic membrane. Once enough of the acetylcholine hits receptors over here on the postsynaptic membrane, it will send another electrical signal or depolarize. And again, this is why, or this is how depolarization occurs. We have the sodium and the potassium. And again, I'm not going to go through all of that. The video touches upon it briefly, and you should have gone through that in anatomy and physiology. Right? So once the certain ion concentration occurs, we get depolarization. All right, and then we see this the sarcolemma. Sarcolemma is actually the sarco meaning fleshy, but in Greek. But we'll see that this is the surface here. So once the muscle fibers surface, again, it receives enough impulses, we get that depolarization, and then it goes through over here, the T-tubules. And the T-tubules lie adjacent to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Or if you recall, the SR, sarcoplasmic reticulum, stores calcium, which is crucial when it comes to contraction, muscular contraction. Okay. Here's a video that you can watch. I have all the videos for you.